Unsaid. Tagline. It is an old cliche that everyone screams into the void, but who does the void scream into? Recommended dirge for this occasion, My Ego Dies in the End by Jensen McCrae. I've begun writing this piece on December 7th, 2023 at 10:53 p.m. I only note this because this is one of many pieces I've started, stopped, and am unsure of its resumption, which sometimes is itself the story to be told, where the space between one's inception, one's own perception of a resolution, and the panopticon's perception or recognition, or heralding or apathy or discarding of either of both inception and resolution tells far larger a story than any of the words on the page attempt to. The said in the unsaid. The said in the unsaid. There are any number of drafts I have strewn across the internet at this time. A thread on the frustration in witnessing folks conversing who are not in conversation, dated November 18th, 2023. I come on this app almost daily, and each time without fail, see at least one instance of people, quote unquote, in conversation that are not having the same conversation and are too proud to course correct as need be. Many deep cases of, is that what was actually said, or is that what was read? You can even be completely right in the argument that you're making, but be wrong for the initial argument made because you're not even addressing it. Some discernment and curiosity would go a long way, people. Another on enmeshing, most notably naming, you can care for someone without needing to fully enmesh with them and those surrounding them, and enmeshing with someone doesn't inherently mean care is present. Dated November 18th, 2023. As a chronic in recovering enmeshed or enmesher, the idea of not knowing where you end and someone else begins can be cute in theory, hell in practice. I know for me, codependency is something I don't usually catch myself on until late or in hindsight. Even when I mean no ill will, it does not mean it can't have ill impact on all parties involved. You can care for someone without losing your autonomy and sense of self. And rushing to fuse with someone doesn't inherently mean you care for them, especially if they don't wish to fuse. It just means y'all are tethered in a way, but what that way is rooted in matters. You have to check and see if a fear and or wound is there too. In my case, my anxieties and wounds rooted in abandonment could cause me to want to cling too tight to any and all relationships for fear of loss, and the following belief that each loss, quote unquote, proves I'm inherently unlovable and burdensome. So I have to check my incitements to get to know folks and really discern if it's an excitement about them or a fear about myself. Often it's a mix of both, and a general excitement and novelty. And I have to consciously practice detachment so the fear doesn't overtake or supersede. I've talked before about all the things that posture as love, hinging on the notion that fear can look a whole lot like love if you cloak it right. Intention and reflection are really so vital to the health of relationships. Without them, shit doesn't survive. What helps me in my current relationships are my niggas being clear communicators and hard stop boundary niggas. They're very clear about their needs for alone time, space, processing, etc. They don't leave room for ambiguity, which is where my fears start to scream. That clarity is a balm. Their clarity is a balm. These are all things that I'm learning, shedding, resting in, pivoting toward as I navigate, reflecting on a number of losses I've experienced as of late. I may not be quote unquote perfect at it, which I am aware is not possible, but I can at least be honest with myself about where I've fallen short before and can afford to grow. A third on the global connection of resistance and what is painted as violence and by whom. Dated November 9th, 2023. The people asking if we'll condemn the resistors are comparing the latter to gangs if we keep it in the stack. Especially with the parallel of not condemning the conditions that led to their formation, but condemning the people's response to their systemic disempowerment and neglect. I always think it's funny when people condemn anything in proximity to gangs, painting them only as red or blue, because they only know two gangs. Groups of violent people who destroy communities and don't give a fuck about the people they claim to protect and serve, and won't condemn Congress and electoral politics. Is that not like you're not any better or smarter because your gang is in a government building? Some kids will join to make cash, put food on the table, feel like they belong, or they feel like they have nowhere else to go, etc., etc. The resistors became who they are because they watched their loved ones and land get desecrated their whole lives to seek justice. Ain't these the same reasons that y'all claim to vote for? But these street gangs are detrimental to kids, don't get their needs met long term, and are willing to sacrifice them at a moment's notice if it means sustaining itself in its interest. Right. like the government behind price gouging, the police state, the sacrificing of its own people for the sake of capital as a pandemic response, and the genocide funded by our taxpayer dollars. So you're saying you're not gonna so you're saying that you want it to win. It'll be worse under I am black, fat, queer, multi-disabled person. I was left to die the moment I was born. Miss me with all that. What I'm actually saying is be fucking for real about the reality that we inhabit. We have been intentionally starved of the infrastructures that we need to survive, and people are fed the fuck up. The answer is not stand a fucking politician that represents a system that wants you dead. It will never matter who it is in there. It wants you dead. Wake up. The answer is build a community network that gets our needs met. And the means that we have traditionally used to do that since the birth of our little government gangs ain't gonna cut it no more. It never cut it for some of us. A lot of us are dead because of y'all's lesser evil bullshit. And even a half joking reflection on the aloe approach within spiritual spaces, dated November 18th, 2023. Why everybody relationship readings romantic? Nigga, I don't want a partner. I want friendships that last. I want mending with my live family members. And no, I don't want them shoehorned into some general reading. Where are the homie horoscopes? The family forensics. Something. I get romance shit, niggas bank because of a culture that prioritizes individuality, except for romantic relationships for the purposes of nuclear family models to make more people to feed into the capitalistic machine. Duh. But at some point, we gotta get out of serving the pocket and get into serving the people. I just feel like people don't give a fuck about arrow ace niggas, about non-romantic relationships, about the nuances of existing in relation to one another, period. Every day it's your 7 foot Pisces Aquarius can't stop thinking about you and wants to return. Nigga, I don't give a fuck. Are my homies legit and is my bloodline healing or not? And countless others. Threads on celebrities and their place in matters of actual circumstance and integrity, dating months back, that are now coming to a head on respective timelines. Writings on the tangentially related general populace's quote unquote need to celebrify and deify people who are perceived to be along any access level of power, quote unquote, higher than themselves, as stakes in both the Messiah complex and the ill fated hope that redemption of another's character that they're hoping to live vicariously through will mean affirmation or redemption for their own existence. Commentary on the conversations on quote unquote bias, the term itself, and its actual real life expressions and implementations that only drive home the point that there's still a communal disconnect between denotation and connotation. Hell, there is a draft from nearly 3 months ago on this very Substack detailing the spiral that I had when trying on an old pair of shorts and finding they fit a whole lot more loosely than they used to, which coalesced into my realizations about the then current standing of my depression and my inability to feed myself physically, financially, emotionally, and spiritually, triggering old lingering wounds about commentary on my body and all the metaphysical ways that my body tells me of my wasting away, how signs of dying could creep up so quietly, and the way complex trauma still embedded in my mind reads that as the only reality my body and itself are deserving of. Miles of reflections and witnessings. I have been witnessing, I have been witnessing, and I have been leaving it unsaid, and it has been taking its toll, which on surface sounds very weak, especially in light of everything. And I want to clarify that it's not just the witnessing that is taking its toll, it is the unsaid. Recently, in conversation with a dear friend, an artist and visionary in their own rights, they named in a piece they felt in their heart that, quote unquote, despair is a natural response to being surrounded by death and other people's complacency or active participation in people's extinction. I won't tell you that hopelessness is liberation, but I do think it's unavoidable. I often find myself submerged in what feels like an ocean of despair, and while trying to swim, I see others flailing too. During my forced submersions, I also see others acknowledging people's grief and offering encouragement. I think in allowing others to name their grief, we actually lift each other up and rescue each other from drowning. How poignantly that struck me. How deep in conversation it was with a piece of my own on grief, which named Take Your Mornings as They Come and do so communally if you can. Even if the community in question is you returning to this piece, the living will not give you the time to adequately mourn your fullness, then time. The shared notion of how important it is that grief have a place to go. In conversation with another dear, the grim to my reaper, the death doula's death doula, who in holding me with my struggles of shadow and grief laid me bare in naming, quote, you were in the valley of shadow death and refusing to die. You are not allowing yourself to feel the enormity of what it is to die. Each time you aim to transmute it immediately without ever just sitting with it, even for a moment. Being okay with death only when something else is, quote, promised on the other side of it is not dying, it is not surrender. It is bargaining. And bargaining is not the last stage of grief, is it? Your encouragement for me to sit with the crushing despair of what it would feel like if all this shit really was for nothing. If there was no promised resolution or absolution or life on the other, or sometimes even the same, side of what all I feel obligated to engage in order to survive. They're parable for the ways that the shadows of our minds are often childlike, and they are not inherently bad, and often just wish to be heard and sat with. That the more that we ignore them, the louder they become. How they communicate our unmet needs, while maybe not as palatably, but as effectively as any other mental and bodily cue. And a final statement and question that rewired the ways I approached myself in my grief. Quote, we give so much time and energy to our light and accomplishments, and our shadows deserve the same. So, what failure will you be celebrating today? An acknowledgement of the refraction time between ending and beginning, between death and quote unquote life, or as I formerly named for the marginalized, or specifically marginalized niggas, perpetual mourning, may be so short that it is negligible, that endings become beginnings and beginnings endings. But still, there is a refraction time, and ending and beginning, death and perpetual mourning, are their own separate entities in their own right, too. As much as they should be considered in relation and tandem, they are also both worthy of full expanse of their respective breadth, of their own reverences. And now, fresh of a third conversation with someone of growing endearment, a being whose presence reminds me of how I walk with my shadow in companionship, and once again examining what it means to get free. In an Ask About Writing that turned into a 5 message, hour-long and total voice message saga, I found myself reaffirming the notion of writing as a medium of catharsis first and foremost. Because no one comes to a writing to see the writer. The writer is merely a conduit for the audience to see themselves. The only person who will ever know why the writer wrote their work, the ways in which it is alive to the writer, is the writer. And that's only insofar as the author's own memory and knowing for why they've written something sustains. So as the writer, the goal is to write like no one is bearing witness to you, because they are not. If one wishes to amend the works later for sharing outside of themselves, that is fine. But one can never capture the essence of all they need to say if they first refuse to say all they need to say. You cannot condense what is not there. And you cannot get free with shadows unexplored, skeletons unrattled, and restrictive bonds left unsevered. It is now January 1st, 2024. I've returned to this piece a number of times to reread it as far as it had been written, but I have not been able to bring myself to write. I'm once again not in the same headspace or even existing as the same nigga as the nigga that started writing this piece. And the nigga I am currently doesn't have the energy, the desire to write whatever fluffy shit I was probably gonna put here initially. So let's cut the shit. We are here to get free, after all, right? The shit I ain't say before was about the number of times that I died at the end of last year. When I realized this crowdfunding shit was dead and I needed to pivot again, in the face of going back to court for eviction cases 2 more times, one currently in processing, the 3 friendship breakups I experienced back to back to back, a flaring of my heart condition about 2 weeks later to a magnitude I had seen in almost 5 years to the date. I stood in my doorway alone with maskless first responders and EMTs in my immunocompromised face, who asked me why I was masked, if I had COVID, if I did not have COVID, why I was wearing a mask, with a heart rate of 240 beats per minute. For comparison, a standing heart rate is 72 beats per minute. Because of my heart condition and the first heart surgery I had years ago, my resting heart rate had been around 90 to 100 beats per minute. The episode that prompted that surgery was a heart rate of 232 BPM. I guess one could say that this round I've reached a new personal best. Before calling the paramedics, I did everything that I could to make sure that this was an actual episode and not one of my flutters I get from time to time. Because an episode meant I needed to call my family, of which I've written extensively about, in the event that I physically died. And even knowing that, I still almost decided not to dial the phone. Debated how bad it could be to go it alone and recant later, or to just to let my heart run until it was content, and hopefully I would be too. the latter of which bringing a dark chuckle to me as I imagined it a parting response from my landlord to find as they finally break into my apartment to get me up out of there like they've been trying to do for months. But I called my family and I called the paramedics, joked with the maskless nurses and the ambulance, coined No Post November. I chuckled at that louder than they did. They named their glad I knew what my condition was. Otherwise, they would have given me another medicine that, when paired with my actual condition, likely would have stopped my heart. I chuckled again. Got to the hospital. Listened to the whole hall whisper how they'd never seen my condition in person before. I was a textbook only case. I texted hardly anyone, but the folks that I did text, I texted like everything was fine. Didn't tell them about my episode. Even did some retweeting. I held all but the bare minimum aside for as long as possible. But with my emotional, spiritual, financial, and now physical states of being all directly in crisis and survival mode, nothing felt safe to share with anyone at any time. So I bottled it. My grief had no place to go, and that nearly killed me. It is now anywhere from February 15th, 2024 to February 18th, 2024. I'm once again here as a different person in a different space. I'm fresh off walking to the supermarket on a land familiar to me, my hometown. I say hello to the trees, the wind, and the sun. They rustle, gust, and beam brightly in response. I put away my groceries and hop on a call for a doctor's appointment I still have no idea how I'm going to pay for. They go over my info to see if there's been any changes. I let them know I've had a change of address. I've been moved out of my apartment for what is almost 2 weeks now, with no remaining debts or obligations to that complex. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I'm housing secure. I'm adjusting. There are things I now continue to sacrifice mentally in the name of physical safety, but the therapy I began back in November is helping. I'm still trying to make things work. I am still trying to make things work. I am exhausted, but not weary this time, which makes this writing possible, which makes so many things more possible. Today is any day between February 21st, 2024 and February 24th, 2024. I am wrapped in a scarf from the individual I formerly named as one of growing endearment, who I now name as dear friend. I'm contemplating finishing the fried rice I made yesterday using the onion and ginger root they left here before their parting. I'm in deep reflection about what anything has meant since October of last year. That month's breakups and literal heartbreak, November's therapies and surgery, December's uneaseful family and court processing, January's planning and violences and moving, February's limbo. And I'm landing on a spur of the moment reading I received not too long before all of this, in which the reader, pulling the Three of Swords and Tower as my cards, named they felt the former was a hesitancy to, quote unquote, plunge the third dagger in after the Two of Swords. Specifically that the apprehension and rose colored glasses needed to fall away. See things for what they are, and allow the wounds to remind you of how tender your heart is. The latter, the tower, as a reassurance that, quote, what you go through will be necessary. When it comes time to let it all fall, let it. You will be better for it in the end. Besides being so on the nose in metaphor in ways that I can only invoke laughter, they were also right. They were so right. This was a grand year of loss in so many ways and in so many contexts, inside and outside of self. But every personal loss I've suffered this year also made grand room for the very things that I needed: lessons, persons, places, a literal surgery. I'm not one of deep knowing in regard to perfection years, but I do know this past year has been my 2 year, and 2 deals in matters of value. And I do not look at that as merely monetary bestowal, but also in what is held dear, what holds circumstance for me, what I choose to hold personal stake in, what holds me in and at stake. And in that vein, this has been a year of learning what I do and do not like, what I will and will not accept, what I will and will not carry forward with me, a practice in leaving what needs to be left, and for once, not mistaking that for the all of myself. I do not emerge from any of these interactions the same, but I do emerge And that's more than I believed was possible. I'm in reflection and conversation with one of my outward hearts, a deer who's named aptly for the season of death, whose accompaniment reminds me how each season of death is followed by a season of bloom. With us venting our grievances, which per usual mirror one another in unmistakable ways, in their unconventional prayer of, I hope them niggas leave you the fuck alone and let you fucking breathe. And my quiet resolving to let me be the one who gets off my own case, to let me breathe too. I'm sure there is more here that I have left unsaid, things that I am mulling over and working through, moments that I hold very dear and very close because of all the things I've learned are best kept unsaid, at least to the panopticon. Personal wins are one. Every other detail burned into my memory and psyche pertains to all the instances named above and the entire lifetime, but especially last 2-ish years of survivorship. Traumas my body will never not know, but also memories I will never not cherish. I take both as they come. Often, they are in tandem. I have expelled onto this page the grief that has felt most pressing in my body in this span of time. By the time of its publishing, I think this will be a thing that I will become more comfortable doing. I take the narrowing dates between my returning to this piece as a sign. But for now, today, it is February 25th, 2024. By the time anyone else may read this, I may once again be a different person. I, myself, may be the very quote unquote anyone else in question. I may be in a different time, in a different space, physically, emotionally, and or spiritually. Die to shed once, twice, thrice more, as I do each day in this earthen body. But I have learned very tangibly now that that is okay. That in my re-emergence, I'm still myself. And I'm finding that's a pretty alright thing to be. I do not know what this next year will bring me. I have some idea of what I may bring to it, but there's currently still ample time before spring, so those things may change, too. I have no idea who I will be, but if they're anything like me, they'll find their due time and due way to speak for themselves. To not let the griefs go unaired, to not let the journey go undocumented. So I leave that to their wake. The rest is now more easily left unsaid.